you a well-balanced and broad picture of what's going on in the science, in the county and the state, and in how to talk to people about it. So I'm not going to waste any more time talking about me, but I want to say a few words about the three speakers. So we have Joyce Tuten in the middle here. She's a chemistry teacher and with a rooting section. She's a chemistry teacher at Clarksburg High School. She's a NOAA-trained climate steward educator and a member of the Climate Reality Project Leadership Corps. She's also a member of the Middletown, Maryland Sustainability Committee, and she'll do some explaining about some of the science behind global warming and some of the impacts of global warming that we can see now. Mike Tidwell, over there in the white shirt, is the founder and director of Chesapeake Climate Action Network, which is a grassroots nonprofit that's dedicated to raising awareness of the impact of and solutions for global warming in Maryland, Virginia, and the district. He was a driving force behind many of the clean energy laws we now have in the DMV, including offshore wind, clean cars, and last year's Clean Energy Jobs Act that will increase Maryland's requirement for solar and wind energy progressively as we move through time. And he'll tell us about some of the efforts going on here in Montgomery County and in Annapolis, state legislature activities that are addressed to address climate change. And finally, we have Dr. Ed Maybach sitting here next to me, who is the director of the George Mason University Center for Climate Change Communication. And communication about climate change is a huge issue. He's very well suited for this role because of his diverse and well-integrated background. He has a bachelor's degree in social psychology, a master's degree in public health. In public health, people don't think about public health issues related to climate change, but actually there are a lot of health issues related to climate change. And he has a PhD in communication, so hopefully he knows how to talk to people. He was a member of the committee.
By the way, that's a great laugh line in the movie Moonstruck. The guy introduces himself as a professor of communication, and the whole movie theater every time would erupt in laughter. I never quite understood.
We're not going to do that. We're going to go. So he was a member of the committee that produced the third U.S. National Climate Assessment in 2014. His research focuses on public understanding of and engagement in climate change. Some of the GMU Center for Climate Change Communication programs include Climate Change in the American Mind, which is looking at attitudes toward climate change across different demographics. Climate Matters, a program that includes 625 TV and news meteorologists across the country, and the 4D project to detect and debunk misinformation about climate change. So he's going to talk to us about how we talk about climate change. Before we call them up, we wanted to take a couple of minutes to get from you if you have any big picture questions that you'd like to have answered. What would you like to get out of this? This will help the speakers know what to emphasize in their as they think about what they're going to talk about. So does anybody want to start? Doris is going to write some things. Diana, and we should introduce Diana Conway, who is the president of Women's Democratic Club.
This is the committees at work, so thank you to the committee chairs, Yvette Monroe and Sarah Waller, who appears here somewhere.
Sarah's homesick.
So my question, I have sort of a two-part question. What are the three top things people can do in their daily lives? And who are the three top states, jurisdictions, taking action that we should be emulating?
Good.
Okay, what are the three top things
we can do, and
our daily lives?
Three top jurisdictions that Maryland could follow.
I'll follow
Fran Rothstein, past president of WDC.
I'll follow Diana's lead. What is the one or three top actions that the legislature could take, should take this session?
Good question for
Got you
For
covered.
Mike. Other questions? Karen?
Yeah, on a more global scale, what I've been reading, climate change action won't really happen unless we go after the corporations and the oil and gas companies. I'm wondering what we can do as individuals here in Montgomery County to help put pressure on that kind of change.
Got you covered too.
So, yeah, what can individuals do to pressure the big companies? Sorry, I'm backward. I'll get you next.
Big
Yeah,
corporations.
so, I find it pretty easy to talk to people who agree with me about climate change, but not so easy to persuade people who have a different perspective or just don't believe that this is really a crisis. So, I'd love to hear, any advice on how to be persuasive with people who don't agree with me.
Advice on how to be persuasive?
Yeah, how to talk to people who deny or don't agree. I think that's in your wheelhouse.
When people,
We don't agree.
Yeah.
And you,
The top issues in Montgomery County right now, and who are the key political players?
so who are the top,
The top issues in Montgomery County for climate emergency
okay,
right now, and who are the key political players to try to?
you and then you.
How many of the 400 bills sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk are related to climate? And 200 and something of them are bipartisan.
I didn't get that one.
How many bills on McConnell's desk are related to climate, and are any of them bipartisan?
Yeah, to more specific, to, I think it was number 5, is how can we convince the business and development community to get on board with the necessary actions?
Okay.
Say that again?
How can we convince the business and development community
Okay, hold on.
locally to get involved,
No, to get on board.
to get on board,
With the necessary changes.
to get involved,
No, to get on board.
get on board?
What does that mean, get on board?
On board? Well, at least stop opposing necessary change and B, to adopt the necessary changes in housing and business practices and other buildings.
Back?
So, how to, related to number 5, how to deparalyze people who feel like that there's nothing that they can do.
Okay.
How to activate people
How
who are
how to deparalyze people who think this is just so enormous that they can't do anything. And you?
How to do effective outreach in red districts, particularly about the reality or how realistic the 100% renewables goal is.
Okay, how to be active in, what do we say in red districts? Blue districts tend to agree. And then the last 2 questions here.
This is, maybe adds to number 4. Has there been any policy similar to divestiture of investments in companies that did, similar to apartheid, for non-sustainable?
There are some
As far as
pressures.
putting pressure on corporations.
Pressures to divest from
Okay,
fossil
let me
fuels.
see, I was saying, are there policies in consideration for divestiture
Yeah.
As a strategy,
or?
for number 4.
An example.
Okay, last question, and then we'll get to this. Yeah.
Yes, how do we
Oh,
allocate
maybe
the
he was trying to
costs
get
and
this.
sacrifices that some of these measures will require? Some things are more expensive, some things are less convenient, some things you already have and other people don't have yet.
Good question.
How do we
We allocate the sacrifices that would be necessary.
The costs and
The costs and sacrifices.
The cost, sacrifices.
Those are,
That's 12, do we keep going?
why don't we move on, I'd like to, we're gonna start with Joyce. She has some information for those of you who, just to bring everybody to a level understanding about some of the science and, what some of the impacts are. And from some of the faces in the room, I think, many of you will be aware of this, but many of you will learn something new.
okay to record?
Sure. Well, I don't know.
It's being recorded for WDC. I'm not sure what WDC does with it, but do speakers have an objection? They've all given these talks publicly before. Joyce.
So thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. I am a chemistry teacher. I am not a climate scientist. I've had a lot of training about climate science. I am going to talk about the basic science. So if you're like me, woo, the science, graphs, charts, data. If you're over 25, you probably have had no formal education in climate science. And so I'm watching the clock. I have 25 minutes. I'm going to blow through what you could do in 5 years for a PhD. So it's a lot of information. Stay with me. The very end, the second part, the impacts, are super depressing and scary and gloom and doom, and really illustrate the utter crisis this is, and that we all need to leave here not as stronger believers, but as stronger believers who are going to act today. Today we're going to do something, and tomorrow and the next day, because we must move to action, because it's so serious.
Joyce, do you want the lights off or just on? It's fine. Can everybody see?
I can see just fine.
We can turn off the lights, but it like turns off all the lights. So it's like that. Is that good? You can see the slides better. Is that good? Okay.
Okay, so real quick, the greenhouse effect is what it sounds like. The sun's energy can get into the greenhouse, but most of it can't get out, so the greenhouse warms up. The Earth works in a very similar way. Our atmosphere acts like glass. So some of the sun's energy, most of the sun's energy gets all the way through our atmosphere, but a lot of it can't get out. And so it's trapped on our planet, and we stay warm. And it's super awesome that we have a greenhouse effect, because if we didn't, we'd be a frozen ball like the moon. So the greenhouse effect is critical to our life. The problem is we are changing the balance of the greenhouse effect. So I love this slide. It's from Al Gore's training. You recognize it. So I love it because the waves are 2 different colors and 2 different lengths. So the energy coming in from the sun is really short wavelength radiation that is really high in energy. And all that energy can get through most of our atmosphere. And it comes in and it hits the earth. And it hits whatever it hits, your house, the forest, the ocean, your skin. And all those things absorb some of that energy, but not all of it. A lot of that energy is radiated back, but what's radiated back is longer waves that don't have as much energy. That infrared radiation, that gets trapped by greenhouse gases and stays on the planet, okay? So that's the greenhouse effect. So what is a greenhouse gas? These are the greenhouse gases we have in our atmosphere. So the first 5 are both natural and man-made. The last one, this is a class of chemicals that are entirely man-made. So I will almost entirely talk about carbon dioxide. That's mostly what you hear in the news when they talk about carbon emissions. They're mostly talking about carbon dioxide. But notice methane also has carbon in it. So methane is also really important. And methane is a more potent greenhouse gas, so it's very important. They're all very important and all have a big impact. And as you might expect, they're all going up, all of them, by our actions. If you look at this graph, this is from the Big Island in Hawaii. Since the 60s, this is a measure of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, parts per million, and it's going up. So we're way up here. I think we hit a record of 414 parts per million, the new record that was hit. This is the best data I could find for 2019. It's too early from 2019 to get the actual data of emissions, but the projection is that we once again broke a record, the globe. We once again broke a record and emitted more, when we are in fact supposed to be decreasing. The United Nations has indicated we should be decreasing by almost 8% a year for the next 10 years, and we're still going up. This is data from NOAA. This is a pretty complicated graph. This is years all the way back, almost 1 million years. The red is temperature going up and down. The blue is carbon dioxide going up and down. And you can see we're off the charts. Actually, my chart's not even right. That's not even 400, and we're at 414. So what is going to happen to our temperature in the next 100 years or 500 years or 1,000 years? And the thing to understand about carbon dioxide and temperature is they are not instantaneous. You don't change your thermostat and the house is instantly warm. You don't put 3 more blankets on and you're instantly warmer. Heat needs to build up. Temperature lags behind the carbon dioxide. So what is projected to come is pretty frightening in terms of the temperature rise. So where's all this carbon dioxide coming from? Ta-da! It's coming from our fossil fuels. So oil is a big mixture of all sorts of carbon compounds. This one is octane that we put in our cars. This is methane, natural gas. And coal is a big mixture of all sorts of things, but let's just say coal is carbon. You burn anything with carbon and you will produce carbon dioxide. It's super simple chemistry. You also produce massive amounts of energy, which is why we like them. We can't hate on our fossil fuels too much, right? Because our world is pretty awesome, and thanks to the energy we got from fossil fuels. The thing is, though, we can't keep burning them. Like, in just a few years, we need to downscale completely from mostly burning them, and it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be hard and expensive and politically challenging. But it's this carbon dioxide that we have been pumping into our atmosphere. This graph is maybe the most important one of the day of my little talk. It's super complicated. This is time going back since the start of the Industrial Revolution, and this sort of imaginary center line, that's an average. So this center line, that's the average global temperature that the planet has experienced every year since the Industrial Revolution. And these blue and red bars, that's temperature that year. So you can see, if you were born after 1980, you have never experienced anything other than a warmer than average year. You've never lived in a colder than average year. So, and if you understand a graph, notice it's getting steeper. As it goes steeper, that means acceleration. So we not only are warming, we're warming more, we're warming faster. This gray line that's following, that's carbon dioxide. So it's the science behind carbon dioxide as a greenhouse gas is super clear and has been understood for centuries. So yeah, we're warming because of the greenhouse gases, and it's bad. 2019 is once again a record year. So we've had pretty much nothing but record-breaking years in the last 2 decades. I love this map. This is a 5-year average compared to a 30-year average, because one of the things that I think is really important to understand is that the warming is not even. We're not all warming at the same amount. The Arctic is warming twice as fast or twice as much as the rest of the planet, and that has really serious implications for climate as a whole. This is frightening, because who wants to live here? 53 days above 90, that's essentially the whole summer. And I know a lot of people leave Florida in the summer because it's brutal. So that's the essence, that we are warming. That's global warming. Global warming shouldn't be thrown out, that word. Global warming means the globe is warming. Everything's warming. The air's warming, the land's warming, the water's warming. Everything's warming. And because of that warming, the climate is changing. So temperature patterns and differentials are changing, the precipitation patterns are changing, humidity levels are changing, wind patterns are changing. Everything's changing. That's climate change. Yeah? So, are we ready for the horror? So this is the real horror. And this is not a comprehensive list. It's not in any particular order. This is just how my brain put it all together. The climate is so complex. It all interacts and impacts each other. So where you start, where you end, where you go next doesn't necessarily matter. So this is not in order of importance. It's just in order of my brain. Welcome to my brain. Okay, so all of this extra heat, where has it gone? 80% of it has gone into the ocean. The oceans have absorbed about 80% of all this extra heat energy. And this is not a temperature chart. This is a measure of energy in joules. So massive amounts of additional energy have entered the oceans, which means more energy and you have stronger storms. It's super simple science. Well, no. It's not super simple science. It's very, very complicated science. But this does not necessarily mean we will have more storms, but it is predicted, the models predict and say that because of this extra energy, we will have stronger storms. And so for the first time ever, we had 4 years in a row of Category 5 hurricanes. And actually, I'm sad about this graph because this is just America. And most people I remember the big hurricane that hit the Philippines, Hussein, and then there was 2 back-to-back hurricanes that hit Mozambique, really unprecedented. And we're talking about thousands of people dying because every additional level of strength in a storm means more people are going to suffer. So all that heat energy in the ocean means if you are a piece of floating ice in the ocean, you are melting. So all floating sea ice is melting, which means, wow, that's really hard to see. That's okay. We get the picture. That's the Arctic. So it is projected that in about 10 years, there will be no summer ice in the Arctic. When the Earth tilts away from the sun in the winter, the ice will regrow, but it will be so thin that when the Earth tilts back, it will even more quickly melt again. And the frightening thing about this is not just the horror of the extinction of the polar bear. It's a much bigger impact for the entire ecosystem there, because underneath that floating sea ice lives algae in the summer. And that algae, it's a plant, and like all plants, it forms the basis of the food webs. And so all the creatures that live in the ocean, in the Arctic, and there's a massive amount of life in the Arctic, in the ocean, they rely on that food web that will be gone, that base. Okay, staying up in the Arctic. Polar vortex winds. When 5 years ago, 6 years ago, nobody ever heard about a polar vortex wind. Just real quick, every single planet that we know of in the universe has polar vortex winds. All planets do, and on their poles, they're super tight spinning rivers of wind that are very, very high up, like 30 miles up, and they spin under very tight conditions. But what's happening on the Earth up here is the Arctic is warming so much more than the rest of the Earth that the pressure difference between the 2 rivers of wind are not as great as they used to be. The pressure and temperature difference used to be so high that the 2 rivers of wind would slip past each other, and they'd be nice and even. But now their pressures and temperatures are getting closer and closer together, and they're wobbling on each other. And so it is predicted, models predict that the jet stream, which is what is the main river of wind over the U.S., the jet stream will wobble more, which will allow polar vortex winds to dip down into the U.S. more frequently. So we will occasionally have these crazy dips of really cold weather because of this wobbling wind. Staying up in the Arctic, this is kind of a weird view. This is Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Russia. So another problem in the Arctic, because it's warming so much, is that the permafrost is thawing. And this doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's a big, huge deal on many fronts. First of all, it's just a straight up infrastructure problem, because when they build up their roads, cities, airstrips, pipelines, they just sort of plop on right on the frozen permafrost. But now that it's thawing and all mushy, everything is wobbling, and they have a real problem with buildings and construction there now. But the bigger, more serious problem is that as the permafrost melts, the organisms that are dead, lying there dead, they never rotted. They just died and froze. But now they're thawing, and all the bacteria around them are beginning to wake up and eat them. But they're so compressed and compacted on each other that oxygen can't get in. And when you don't have oxygen in, who has a compost? When you don't have an oxygen into your rotting material, it rots under what are called anaerobic conditions, and the rotting isn't a good rotting, and it produces methane. And so massive amounts of methane are being emitted all across the Arctic. And methane, if you remember from that chart, is a more potent greenhouse gas. And it's a terrible feedback loop, because as more of that methane emits, we warm more, which thaws the permafrost even more, which allows even more methane to be emitted. So it's a horror show. Coming out of the Arctic, any other ice anywhere else on the planet, if you're sitting on land, you're melting. Pretty much all the glaciers across the entire planet are melting. Where's all that water going? It's going into the ocean. Most of it. Most of it finds its way into the ocean. So the sea level is rising. Sea level has risen about roughly 8 inches, projected to rise as much as an additional 4 feet, which is, and possibly more. It depends on the changes we decide to make. And this is just, there's an outside, yeah, I mean, my children will be alive. My son here from Australia. My children will be alive. This is actually why I'm here, because it frightens me what's going to happen. Maryland in particular has a special problem because the land here is also subsiding. So the land here is sinking. So we have actually had about a 12-inch rise in sea level. So Annapolis, DC, Baltimore, major flooding problems, and worse to come. And some of our island communities will be unlivable. No question, indisputable. If this frightens me in terms of where people live, most people live somewhere near the water. And when you look at the sea level rise projections and what that will do to populations, is frightening, which leads me to the next concern, which is climate refugees. Where are all these people going? When you can't live where you're supposed to live, where are they going? And who's paying for them to go there, wherever they're going? And they're not selling their house when they leave, because nobody wants it. So we already have climate refugees that our taxpayer money has bailed out. Lots of states are already doing this. Houston is bailing out, is buying up homes and turning them back to wetlands. New Jersey, I think, is up to like 700 homes that they've bought. But we're rich. We have the means by which to bail ourselves out or declare bankruptcy and do something. But where do the poor people go, and how do they go? And if we have, I think there's about 70 million refugees in the world right now, and we all know the geopolitical crisis that the refugees now are causing. What will happen if there's 200 million refugees? And Cornell University did a study about 3 years ago projecting 1 billion, with a B, 1 billion refugees by the turn of the century. That actually frightens me potentially more than anything else in terms of politics and the safety of the future children of this world. This one's near and dear to my heart because Army had us stationed in Hawaii for 3 years. So it is projected that we will lose the majority of the coral reefs, primarily due to warming. But lots of other impacts. one of the big impacts is ocean acidification. This is a pretty complicated graph. I'll explain it real quick. So this is going back in the 50s, and this red line and this blue line are both measuring carbon dioxide. The red is carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and the blue is carbon dioxide in the ocean. So as carbon dioxide rises in the air, some of it mixes into the ocean. So it's going up in the ocean also. Well, very simple chemical reaction. When carbon dioxide reacts with water, you produce carbonic acid. So this graph right here is the measure of pH. So the pH of the ocean is dropping. And if you look at this pH scale here, it doesn't seem like much of a drop, but pH is not a linear scale. pH is a logarithmic scale. So this is actually a 30% drop already. We've already had a 30% drop in the acid level of the ocean. We are projected that the ocean will drop 150% in the pH level. And the problem with that are tiny creatures. When the pH level of the ocean reaches the projected level in 2100, there are many shelled creatures that won't be able to make their shell. Their shell will dissolve in the ocean. Okay, I'm just making sure that's not my phone. No, it's all good, it's all good. I put my phone on airplane mode because I was so afraid it was gonna go off and then I wouldn't be able to find it.
5-minute timer.
Oh, good, that's good to know. All right, I'm close. So if the shelled creatures of the ocean can't survive, they form a huge part of the base of the food web for the ocean. If the coral reefs go extinct, 4,000 fish species rely on the coral reefs, either live there or raise their young there. Our symbolic polar bear. But on the earth, on the land, is also a problem because of shifting biomes. So a biome is mostly defined by temperature and rainfall. So are you a tropical rainforest? Are you a deciduous forest? Are you a desert, a tundra? There's numerous taiga. There's numerous different types of biomes. And what the prediction is with climate change is that we will shift about 13% of the biomes. They will shift from one biome to another. And a biome, the biome defines the type of plants that are living there. So if you shift to a different biome, then different plants live there. And if different plants live there, then different animals live there. So someone's going extinct. So most projections are that we are potentially entering the 6th great mass extinction. My Australia friends, they are predicting that Australia will have extinctions with these fires. Speaking of fires, so we all know they're getting worse. Precipitation. We all remember 2 years ago. So in our region is projected to have significantly greater rainfall, some regions less. And this isn't just Ellicott City or horrors like that, or Houston. It's also animals. Like when that much rainfall, when we got that late spring, summer rain in 2018, the way that scours the rivers right when all the little baby fish are hatching, they're not strong enough to stay in the river anymore. Where'd they all go with all that rain? They all went out to sea and got eaten by somebody. And now they're not in the rivers. And what does that mean for the creatures that rely on them or hunt for them? So the impact of rain cannot be overstated. Agricultural impacts, enormous. During that rain in Maryland, farmers had a tremendous problem getting their crops in or harvesting their crops. One of the big impacts are the nights. The nights are actually warming twice as fast as the day. The temperature warming between the day and the night is not the same. And so many crops rely on a cold night to harden the crop off. Pennsylvania won't be able to grow apples. Maryland, definitely not. Virginia, definitely not. You need that cold, those cold nights. And of course, pests love it, right? You can eat, the warmer it is and the longer the growing season, a pest can maybe get 2 cycles of life in. And you get 2 cycles of life in and suddenly your growth is exponential with the pest. The last one, and then I'm going to hand it off to Mike. The last one is human health impacts, which I really think cannot be overstated. And just heat, just straight up killing people. The mosquitoes, ticks, they like the warm. They like the warm, and additional rains. Health impacts that Sydney and Melbourne right now are dealing with the smoke from those fires. And then lastly, the mental health impacts of another home destruction, another flood, farmers committing suicide. It's really, I don't know, it's quite overwhelming. We need hope. Mike, do you have some hope for us?
Able to give Joyce an hour, she does get into solutions, so you don't have to.
Yeah. That's true.
But we want to move on to Mike.
Wow, a little pressure there.
Yeah.
Bring everyone back up. I'm just going to sit because I think everyone can see me. First of all, I just want to thank Olivia and Doris and everyone who helped organize this. A really well-attended event. When it's such beautiful spring weather out today, I used to be here instead. I'm very impressed. Yeah, it is scary. And I'm glad to be up here with my friend Ed Maybach. You're in for a treat when he speaks. He's very, very well known all over the United States. It's probably the top climate communicator and pollster in this country, or certainly one of them. And really looking forward to hearing his comments. So, yeah, the weather is weird all over the world. Obviously, Australia. I read in the Post this morning that Israel's been having extraordinary flooding off the charts. All over the world, it's too hot, too wet, too dry, too cold, wherever you go. It takes a lot, though, to freak me out on climate change. I mean, I founded Chesapeake Climate Action Network 17 years ago. I left a charmed life as a freelance journalist, where I just really had a great life, just traveling the world and writing for the Washington Post and other publications. But I developed a severe conscience on climate change, and I've been eating, living, breathing this issue for the last 17 years straight. But something happened this last summer that really brought the impacts really close to home, and maybe you've noticed it in your neighborhoods elsewhere in Montgomery County. My office is on the 7th floor of a high-rise in Takoma Park, and we look over this really nice urban forest in Takoma Park and Takoma, DC. But in July and August, I started noticing in that rich, deep green canopy of trees, these entire oak trees just dying, sudden death. Leaves still on them. In other words, they leafed out in April, May. They were fully leafed, and yet they were completely brown, and they were completely dead, suddenly like that. I'd never seen that before. Like every 20th or 25th big tree was just dead. And then later learned that it was a consequence of the off-the-charts rainfall that we got in 2018, literally flooded the roots of many of our red oaks, especially the older ones, leaving them vulnerable to this infestation of beetles coming up from the Carolinas that have decimating red oaks all over the East Coast. So the impacts are everywhere. This is climate change, and seeing a 100-year-old tree go down is just so. I mean, they've lived a century. They adapted to, they emerged in a certain climate, and now our climate has changed so much that these resilient trees that have been around longer than any of us have been alive just can't make it anymore. And that is a real wake-up call. So what are we going to do about it? All right. So first of all, we did have a question about 3 things you can do in your personal life, which I think is good. I will tell you, if you come to my house, you will see that I am obnoxiously green. I'm just hideously green in my personal life.
Conspicuously so.
Conspicuously green.
Evangelically.
So solar panels, Chevy Volt in the driveway, which I drove here.
He rode his bike.
Try to walk a lot. But if you were to take 3 steps, really, most of the number crunching shows that the number one thing you actually can do is eat lower on the food chain. It's actually eat less meat. It is very, very energy intensive. It's one of the first things that you can do. And thank God you can now get an Impossible Whopper. I mean, if you haven't had one, you seriously, they are amazing. They will fool the most, diehard carnivore. Eat lower on the food chain. Obviously, energy use at home. You can now, if you can't put solar panels on your roof, we now have Community Choice Energy. How many of you have signed up with one of the Community Choice Energy folks? Go online, just Google Community Choice Energy or Neighborhood Sun, really great company that's selling Community Choice Solar. You can have it wherever you live, if you rent, if you have a shady roof, whatever it is, you can get solar and your price goes down. Your bills go down. So no reason not to do it. Transportation, obviously, walk more, trains more, look at an electric car. Used electric cars are now flooding the market for really cheap. I bought my Chevy Volt for $14,000, and it was used in 2014 with only 28,000 miles on it. And divest, whatever investments you have. Get out of the fossil fuel industry. One, it helps the planet. Two, it's a bad investment. It's a Ponzi scheme. It's going down soon. When it goes, it's going to go fast. So get out now. But basically, I tell people, number one thing you can do on the individual level in terms of climate change is stop being an individual. Join campaigns to change laws, because this is a nation of laws, and if we want to change this nation, we have to change the laws. In the 1960s, we didn't ask bigoted Southern sheriffs to consider going integrated every other week voluntarily and give it a try. There's some things that come along in our country that are just so wrong, they have to be banned by law. And one of those is burning fossil fuels. We have to phase out our use of fossil fuels by law. And the world's leading climate scientists, as you all well know, say we have, the human beings to really feel the impacts of climate change, and we're the last generation to be able to do anything about it. So we have about 10 years left to do it. So let's start at the county level. Our county, Montgomery County, has declared, did in December 2017, that we are in the midst of a full-blown climate emergency. If you're experiencing an emergency, step one, say it, declare it. And that's what our county has done, and cities and counties across the United States have done so. Our county council, in declaring this emergency, also set a goal of cutting our greenhouse gas emissions for the entire economy of Montgomery County. Not just county buildings, not just libraries, but for the whole economy, that we're going to cut our greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by the year 2027, and that we were going to eliminate all greenhouse gas emissions totally by the year 2035. That's really ambitious. Whether we're going to get there in time, I don't know, but I know there are a lot of us who really want to work for that. So what has happened since December 2017, when the climate emergency was passed, and our climate mobilization movement has really gotten off to a good start, but we need to go faster. I know the county executive has declared that he wants all new homes to have solar panels, and hopefully we can look forward to that becoming law soon. Hans Riemer of the County Council has a community solar bill to even further expand the ability for us to have community solar on, parking lot roofs and places throughout our county. Tom Hucker, my council member, has a Green New Deal bill that he's working on that's going to have labor provisions and green bank provisions and things like that. I think it's going to be finalized pretty soon. And then finally, I think the biggest way that we're going to decarbonize our economy with the kind of speed that we need to is that we need a law passed actually in Annapolis that would allow us to practice something called community choice aggregation, which is basically counties and cities, the city of Chicago, Marin County in California, have taken control of their grid, basically. They've seized control of the grid from PG&E in California, Exelon in Chicago, that allows these smaller government entities to make their own choices about renewable energy, their own choices about battery storage, their own choices about backup energy for hospitals, et cetera, that allow them to move toward renewables a lot faster. And that's the pivot between what we're trying to do at the county level. We need community solar gardens. We need a green bank. We need to expand our green bank in our county. We need to do a lot of things, and I think there are others here who know a lot more about what's happening at the county level than I do. But at the same time, our county needs the state to pass a law to allow our county to take control of the grid from Pepco and make our own decisions about how fast we want to go with renewables. And that's why my legislator in District 20, Lord Tarkoudian, will be proposing a bill in Annapolis. I think the bill may have already been introduced. It's the Community Choice Energy Act. You can look it up online, Lord Tarkoudian, and we really need to pass this bill. It will, again, allow us to do what I just mentioned. It will allow any county and any major city in Maryland to follow the route of Chicago, follow the route of Marin County in California, and really go a lot faster than Pepco would allow. I mean, Pepco wants to sell electricity. Pepco wants to sell a particular kind of electricity, i.e. mostly nuclear from Exelon, its parent company. And we need to transition toward more resilient local solar and battery storage and electric vehicles and electric charging stations. All of these things would be much more possible if we could pass Lord's bill. So look out for that. Another really big bill that is going to be discussed, and the bill that I'm going to personally be working the most on, is a bill to reform our Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act in Annapolis. In 2016, the Maryland General Assembly passed a law saying that our state, economy-wide, has to reduce greenhouse gas emissions for everything, buildings, transportation, electricity use, 40% below what it was in 2006, 40% reduction by the year 2030. Unfortunately, that bill left a lot of the planning and enforcement of that plan, that effort to Governor Larry Hogan, or whoever was going to be governor. Larry Hogan has completely dropped the ball on that. He was supposed to release a climate action plan by December of 2018. Is that right? Yes, 2018. And he just didn't release the plan. And only 10 months later, after it took a whole list of environmental and faith groups, all of us writing a letter to the governor saying, where's the climate action plan? Did he finally release the plan in October of 2019, this past October, and it was basically a joke. It claimed, I kid you not, that one of the ways the governor was going to fight climate change was expand 495 and expand 270 and allow more cars to move more quickly because they would be idling less. Less traffic means less global warming in the governor's mind. To anyone but the governor, that's a total embarrassment on climate policy. He also wants to basically burn coal for decades. No plan to get off of coal. He wants to encourage the combustion of imported frack gas. We have banned fracking in our state. Thank you. Many of you in this room helped us ban fracking in 2017. The governor signed that bill, but now he's trying to promote the import of frack gas from Pennsylvania so we can light more gas on fire to heat our homes and to create electricity, which is unacceptable. So we need to reform the Maryland Greenhouse Gas Emissions Act. We also need to increase the reductions. As we just heard, the science is accelerating, showing that it turns out the planet is we have a more finely tuned climate than we realized, and we need to go faster in terms of reducing our climate and our global warming emissions. So the reform bill, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act reform bill, we don't have a sexy name for it. We're going to try to sneak it past the General Assembly as like a technical fix. It's going to set higher reductions. So instead of 40% by 2030, it's going to be 60%, which matches the new science. And not only are we going to do that, but we're going to explicitly say in the bill, you cannot count highway expansion as greenhouse gas emissions, right? How radical, thinking outside the box here. It will also mandate that our state of Maryland will plant 1 million new trees every year for 10 years. 1 million trees a year for 10 years. We will also increase our efficiency from 2% gains in efficiency every year, which is current law, to 3% every year. And that additional efficiency gain has to be targeted in low and moderate income communities so that we make all homes more weatherized. And so that is a really big bill, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. And if I spam you, if you're on my email list for Chesapeake Climate Action Network, and if you're not, please sign up so we can keep you posted on all things in Annapolis. There's sign-up sheets over here. You'll be hearing a lot from me about that bill. Another really big bill in Annapolis is a coal shutdown bill that will be Delegate Kumar Bharvi of Montgomery County's bill to shut down coal plants throughout the state in a just and fair way. There's going to be a carbon pricing bill that I'm very excited about that Senator Ben Cramer of Montgomery County and Delegate David Frazier-Odago of Montgomery County will be sponsoring that bill. And part of the money, $350 million, as part of a statewide carbon tax, would go to fund Kerwin, which you might have heard our legislators are looking for money to fund the Kerwin education reforms. So those are the really big bills at the state level. Community Choice Energy, Lord Charkoudian, Greenhouse Gas Reform Act, which is coming, coal plant shutdown, and carbon pricing. Those are some big bills to keep your eye on. And at the national level, there's a lot being discussed, no big bill yet. Step number one at the national level is get rid of Donald Trump, period. All things are possible. He's not around, not much. God help us, will be possible if he is around. I've been working really closely with my congressman and probably most of y'all's, Jamie Raskin, and Congresswoman AOC to hold hearings to bring in former ExxonMobil scientists to, on the record, reveal just how much these big oil companies have denied the climate change for the last 40 years, have confused the public, and are responsible financially for the impacts that we're starting to see, just like the tobacco industry. So those hearings started in October. They're going to be more coming this year. Jamie Raskin and AOC's thoughts on this are that we can only get so far on a Green New Deal or national carbon pricing. We can only get so far down the solution track if the oil companies are still on Capitol Hill writing that policy and in the room when those policies are made. We're only going to get so far. We're not going to get to where we need to be. We don't let the tobacco industry write the laws governing tobacco use. They've been discredited. Their social agency is gone. We have to do the same with the oil industries, and we have to do that through reconciliation hearings, which have started. And the goal is by the end of this year, the major executives of the major oil companies will be seated before Jamie and AOC's committee, raising their right hand and admitting that they lied to us for 40 years. So those are the really big issues, county level, state level, national level, and I'm sure we'll have time for questions later.
Like Mike, I actually feel more comfortable on my feet, so I will be on my feet. And I have a prepared presentation, but I'm not going to use that. Maybe one or two slides from it. But I want to build on some thoughts that Mike has introduced already, because he's introduced some incredibly important ideas, as has Joyce. She's told us, explained to us the profound emergency state that we are in. Mike has really made it perfectly clear that we are David. They are Goliath. They have been on the battlefield for 40 years, poisoning the American people's minds with all kinds of misinformation. It's in my mind, it's in every one of your minds, I guarantee it. We hear things over and over and over again, and even if we know better, the more we hear it, the more we accept it as true, and the more the people who manage to get there first start the dialogue first, explain to us how we should see and understand our world first. They created the frame. They created the mental model. They literally influenced the neural networks in our brains. So this fascination that we all have currently about what can we do personally to reduce our own carbon footprint, I want to suggest to you that that is playing into their frame. And that if we are David, but if David is going to get better at winning not just the battle, but the war for human civilization, human society, human well-being for the next 100 generations, we have to identify those mental models that that Goliath has implanted in our brain, and we have to reject them. Yesterday in the New York Times, there was a wonderful op-ed. I don't remember the woman's name who wrote it, but she absolutely nailed it. She said, essentially, don't get all in a tizzy about reducing your own carbon footprint. do it. Do it, reduce your carbon footprint in any way you can, in any way it feels comfortable to you. I believe somewhere on this part of the room mentioned, it was you, who mentioned the costs, you know.
I wasn't just talking about individual costs.
Okay, great, I'm going there. So do what you can, and that's all good, but that's never gonna win the war. That is, so if you preoccupy yourself too much with individual behavior change, changing your own life, signaling your virtue to your neighbors and your loved ones, it feels good, and actually there are real benefits. So when I kind of was rooted to Mike and I said he's conspicuous about how he has reduced his carbon footprint, and that's a really good thing. That's actually a much better thing than the reduction of his individual carbon footprint. Because what he's doing by letting other people know, by making a point of bringing it into his conversation, he's signaling to other people, maybe you want to be thinking in these ways too. Maybe you want to be acting in these ways too. He's modeling good behavior, and the most important good behavior that he's modeling is this man talks about climate change 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and that actually makes him an incredibly atypical resident of Montgomery County. Our county is doing much better than most counties in America. Our state is doing much better than most states in America, but we are still lagging way behind. We are still the David who hasn't yet figured out how to use our assets to the best of our ability. So a really important point I want to make, and this is responding to some of the first questions that came up, is we don't really have a public opinion problem. I'm going to show you one slide on that. And actually, if you could find the slide that shows the 6 Americas, that would help me. David, we are already winning the battle of hearts and minds. On Tuesday, my team is going to release our latest data from our polling that we did nationwide in November and December. It's really quite amazing. We have this innate sense, because we pay, even though probably none of you are Fox News viewers, you all know what's on Fox News, and it gives us this innate sense that there are 2 Americas. There's the America like us, the America that is apoplectically concerned about climate change, and then there's the other America, the America that doesn't buy it, that is skeptical of it. And the reality is, it just ain't so. The reality is there are 6 Americas, so this comes from research we did 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we did something called an audience segmentation study to try to identify, frankly, to try to debunk what I believed was a misperception that there are 2 Americas with regard to climate change. And what we found is that there were 6 Americas. We are winning the battle of hearts and minds. This is the America that almost everybody in this room is almost certainly a member of, the alarmed. We accept that climate change is real. We accept that it is human caused. We understand that the only climate scientists left on the face of the planet who don't believe that, something's wrong with those people, and there's really just a handful of them. We understand it's bad in all of the ways that Joyce explained to us, and we want to believe there's hope. We want to believe we have agency left. There are actions we can take that will make a difference to prevent the worst of climate impacts for our children, our grandchildren, their grandchildren, and their grandchildren. This group over here, which we call the dismissive, and for those of you who wanted to talk about your loved ones, your neighbors, people you know, your coworkers who don't see it the way you see it. You're undoubtedly thinking about the dismissives. We call this fellow dismissive Dan. We know lots of Dans. I have family members who are Dan. But the point I want to make is in the last 5 years, there's been a dramatic shift in the distribution of the 6 Americas nationwide. Montgomery County is atypical. We are, so many more of us in Montgomery County are at this end of the spectrum. There are really incredibly few of us at this end of the spectrum. But even nationwide, the alarmed have tripled in the last 5 years. Tripled. Even though what we're up against is the billions of dollars a year essentially in fossil fuel money and our other major political party and all of its leaders who are continuing to try to perpetuate those erroneous beliefs that lead us to believe that all is well, sleep well tonight. God bless you. The dismissive, it's very hard to change people's minds once their minds are made up. The dismissive's minds are made up. They feel every bit as strongly that we have it wrong as we feel that they have it wrong. So I would actually, if what you wanted to learn from me today is how do I turn these people around, good luck. I can't really give that to you, I'm sorry. But what I can tell you is that this segment has decreased by about 30, as both of these two segments, they are similar, they just are different in degree of the intensity of their feeling. These people are convinced, these people are still listening, but they tend to be skeptical. Both of these two segments have decreased in size by about 30 or 40% over the past 5 years. That's really something. Something or some things are happening in our world, in our country, in the communication environment, in the social environment, in the political environment, that is even changing some of these people who work really hard not to be changed by people like me and you. The other big thing that has happened, as I said, is those people who were sort of in the middle, they have got pushed to the continuum, to the end of the continuum where the alarmed and the concerned are. So we're winning the battle of hearts and minds. But what Bill McKibben says is winning too slowly is losing in the fight for our climate. We have to accelerate that battle for hearts and minds. I would contend it's less about convincing people that we have a problem and more about activating people who already understand at either they well understand or they understand but they just don't think about it a lot. The most important thing we can do in that battle to change the dynamic, to win, to address the real problem that we face, which is not a public opinion problem, it's a political problem, and it's a corporate problem, and ultimately, to some degree, it's an activation or an apathy problem. My dear friend and colleague, Holly Massett, is here. There are actually you are in the presence of 2 PhD-level communication scientists. I want you people to know that. So when you laugh at the thought of a person wasting his or her time getting a PhD in communication science, there are at least 2 people in this room who did that. And Holly will tell you, and any card-carrying social scientist will tell you, that doesn't matter what the issue is, there is always going to be a gap between people's attitudes and their behaviors. Many people in America, the majority of people in America already have the right attitudes. They understand, they want to see our leaders address these issues. They just don't know what to do. So a big part of the problem is activate, or a big part of the opportunity, is finding a way to activate their already supportive attitudes. So when you all ask, well, what can I do? What are the 3 most important things that we can do? That is such a good question. But I want to reframe it around the 3 most important things you can do in your own personal life, your own home, how you spend your time, how you run your household, and I want to focus it more on how you spend your time, because that's actually the most important thing we can do. Yesterday I had the wonderful, I missed every one of the Fire Drill Fridays, Jane Fonda's protest down at the Capitol until yesterday. I'm so glad I broke away from preparing my spring class to go do that. It was super inspiring. And the point that most of the speakers made, an incredibly diverse, wonderful group of speakers, mostly women, Caucasians, maybe 50% at most, many indigenous voices. It was really, they did it so well. They got beyond our real problem in the environmental movement. But the point that all of the speakers made is the real problem we have is a power problem. Mike said it too, he just said it in different words. He said, I want you to stop thinking as individuals. And I don't remember how you completed the sentence, but essentially he completed the sentence by saying, I want you to start acting together. There are two fundamental lessons from evolution. All living beings who have any sentience at all understand, and even those who don't have sentience still do this behaviorally. When you are threatened, act big and tough, because it is the best defense you have against aggressors, against things that want to eat you, to take your cheese. So act big and tough, and by that I mean speak out, speak up. Don't necessarily have to be angry, although frankly anger is a very potent emotion in the court of public opinion, but you have to be loud, you have to be insistent, you have to keep saying it and saying it and saying it. That is what Goliath has been doing. They've been saying it and saying it and saying it for the past 40 years, and they've been buying friendships who say it for them. In the almost 40 years now that I've been involved in as a communication professional, the one thing I've learned with absolute certainty is the only way we ever actually use communication to affect public change is when we have simple, clear messages repeated often through a variety of trusted voices. Goliath totally knows this. They use their money to buy the best public relations and advertising counsel that money can buy, and they've been delivering simple, clear messages to us over and over and over, and they've been buying the friendship of trusted voices. Just earlier this week, on Monday, I believe, the NAACP released a report which basically said we are no longer going to take the money of the fossil fuel industry, because we now realize we have bought into their lies, and we have been taking their relatively small sums of money, and we've been carrying their water for them. In Florida, for example, where the NAACP has been pretty much adamantly opposed to the development of solar power in the Sunshine State. For God's sake, this is their most abundant natural resource, and it didn't take that much money, that much of Goliath's money, to buy that friend. So evolution has taught us we have to speak up, we have to act tough, and more than anything, we have to act together. Because when we act alone, we're largely powerless. When we act together, we can be powerful. That is how we amass the power. So I actually don't know if Mike is ready to take all of you as volunteers. But my recommendation, the number one most important thing you can do is work together. And don't just form a team on your own and go out and figure out what's important to do. Mike has this awesome team of brilliant, totally passionate people who we are in his debt, in their debt, because they have made Maryland one of the nation's leaders. They have made Washington, D.C. one of the nation's leaders. They're working really hard to make, I'm an employee of the Commonwealth of Virginia, they're working really hard to make the Commonwealth of Virginia, not so much a leader, but at least drag us.
We got a great bill, that we have a shot at passing a really big clean energy bill in Virginia.
And they didn't do that because they were a couple of concerned citizens. They did it because they were a couple of concerned citizens who are building power by bringing other concerned citizens in and showing them the target, showing them what we're going to accomplish, giving them hope that we can amass enough power to make that a reality. And they have really, really been amazing.
Can I interrupt specifically on this topic of showing the elected officials? In Virginia, an increasing number of the elected state legislators who have just taken over the Virginia State House have agreed to stop taking money from Dominion Energy. Dominion Energy spends a lot of money in Annapolis. So our legislators are taking Dominion's money, even though Dominion's own home legislators have vowed not to. There are a couple people leading the charge on this. One of them is Bobby Littman, who can be a little much sometimes, but he has gotten several Montgomery County state legislators to agree not to take it. So I'm not even sure those people would have been offered Dominion money anyway, But I highly urge you, if you're interested in talking to the voices that are making the decisions on Lord Charkoudian's bill on similar legislation in our state, there's more to be done.
Thank you, Dan.
Can I
By
ask
the
a
way,
high-level communications question?
Yes, of
How-
course.
How do you deal with the lies?
how do you deal with the lies? There's not much we can do, but there are some things we can do. So I believe it was Olivia's son-in-law,
My stepson.
stepson. He's choosing to buy into the lies. Olivia would like to know what she can do to convince him that that's just not right. As I said, people who don't want to have their minds changed build up all kinds of psychological defenses to prevent you from succeeding in changing their minds. We've actually done some research. It's almost too simple to believe it works, but it does. Showing people, telling people about the extent of the consensus among the world's climate scientists, the experts who actually study this problem, and telling them that more than 97% of the world's climate scientists are now convinced, based on the data, based on the evidence, that human-caused climate change is a reality, and they are virtually all concerned about it. That has this really amazing effect at resetting people's understanding of the consensus among the experts. Most people, for a really weird quirk in the way the human mind works, it's called the availability bias, when we've seen a climate scientist, as I've already said, there's only a few left in the country now, who doesn't believe, who isn't convinced that human-caused climate change is a reality, when we see about that person or when we read about that person, our mind treats that equivalently to the 97, 98, 99, or actually more like nearly 100% of the world's climate scientists who are convinced based on the evidence that human-caused climate change is a reality. So the mind is working against us in this instance, but to invoke the consensus is a very powerful, helpful way to address the lie that there's a lot of disagreement among the climate scientists. That's actually the number one lie that the fossil fuel industry perpetrates. They have 1,000 different ways of telling that lie. There's a lot of disagreement among the experts. Therefore, it would be premature, wouldn't be prudent, in the words of the first Bush, wouldn't be prudent to start crafting public policy until the scientists reach a greater degree of certainty. So I personally, if I ever get to meet Olivia's son-in-law, or stepson, I'm sorry, I personally will say, his name, I don't know his name. Chuck. Chuck, I know you feel strongly about this. I know you've learned a lot about this. But Chuck, I'm not a climate scientist. You're not a climate scientist. Almost every climate scientist left in the world is convinced, based on the evidence, that human-caused climate change is happening. I gotta say, as a public health guy, public health professional, I gotta trust what the experts have actually told me. The thing I gotta do now is what's my job as a public health professional? How should I be spending my time now that I know this to be true? And how should I be spending my time as a citizen, and as a member of my community, as a father? Those are the questions that I'm asking myself, because the experts have spoken. And actually, a paper, I could share it with you all, a paper that was published about 2 months ago, which reviewed every single climate science paper that was published in the first 9 months of 2019. Every one. There was thousands of them, tens of thousands, I don't remember the exact number. This is a guy named James Powell, a retired climate scientist who had a little extra time on his hands. He went through every single paper and he scored each and every one of them to answer a very simple question. Does this paper affirm the reality of human-caused climate change? Does it take no, or does it dispute it? 100% of those papers published in the first 9 months of last year, 100% affirm the reality of human-caused climate change. That's a pretty high bar to cross, because every one of those papers had to get through the skeptical review of their peer scientists. I wanted to close on a point, and then I'll happily take questions, but I forgot that I actually put the numbers in Montgomery County on this slide. So 33% of us in Montgomery County are alarmed, 37% of us are concerned, only 7% of us are doubtful or dismissive. But I want to close with one final slide, which I believe is here. Sorry, Holly, I can show you the data. So my colleague at Yale, I do these polls with my colleague Tony at Yale. They're called the Climate Change in the American Mind polls. And because we've been doing this polling for so long, we've polled so many people, we actually, he and his team of really, really smart people have figured out how to downscale our survey data so that we can look at public opinion in any county in America and any congressional district in America. It's a little hard to see, but if you go to the Yale Climate Opinion Maps 2019, just Google it, it will take you there. You can explore what those of us in Montgomery County think. You can explore what those of us in Maryland think. If you want to help Mike work in Virginia, you can explore what Virginians think about climate change, what they are doing about climate change, what kinds of public policies they support to deal with climate change. And I just pulled a couple of numbers here to make an important point. So 73% of adults in our counties, 7 out of 10 of us are worried about climate change, okay? That's most of us. This is why I say we don't have a public opinion problem. We kind of already won the battle of hearts and minds. 8 out of 10 of us support a carbon tax on fossil fuel companies. 3 out of 4 of us say environmental protection is more important than economic growth. By the way, the opposite of that is what the fossil fuel industry has been trying to get us to think for the past 40 years. Almost 9 out of 10 of us support tax rebates for people who buy energy efficient vehicles or put solar panels on their home. Almost a total consensus here in Montgomery County that we should be using public resources to make it easier for individual families, individual homeowners, to accelerate their own personal transition into a clean energy economy. 2 out of 3 of us, 66%, say our local government officials should be doing more. 7 out of 10 of us say our government should be doing more. And 8 out of 10 of us here in Montgomery County says Congress should be doing more. So again, we don't have a public opinion problem. Our neighbors are with us. But this, I put up all of those to make the following point. Despite the fact that we're all essentially there, and maybe this was your point, your point, yes, about don't just get them on board, but get them to buy in, I think you said.
Not oppose and implement.
Yeah, okay, great. So only half of us talk about climate change, even occasionally.
That's scary.
There is a climate silence in America. There is a climate silence in Montgomery County. Montgomery County is already, our neighbors are already on board. For God's sakes, our county council declared a climate emergency, but actually I would contend we're letting them off the hook.
Yeah.
They made the declaration, but they're not rolling up their sleeves and getting their hands dirty and getting the job done. If more of us started using our voices to let them know how important this is to us, if more of us started working as volunteers with CCAN or Maryland League of Conservation Voters or Maryland Sierra Club, Mark has lots of wonderful peer organizations.
And the
Doris.
Montgomery County Climate Mobilization, which I'll announce
Thank
the
you.
meeting tomorrow.
Thank you.
Takoma Park Mobilization Environment Committee, don't forget us.
That is the most important way we can consolidate our power.
Right. There's, if you didn't pick it up, there's a resource handout that was on the table. There's a list of how to call, or how to find, how to call your Montgomery County officials. There are some things about how to reduce your footprint. There's a long list of organizations on the back. And we'll see if WDC will email this to everybody who pre-registered or if you signed up as a walk-in and gave your email list. So the links will be live. You won't have to type in a long thing. But yeah, there are lots of groups you can join, and only some of them are listed here, including Mike's group. Thank you so much to our for questions. I will mention that there are also some additional information items from CCAN and others on the table on the side that you can look at. But we have time for some questions. So,
Mine are both for you, Mike. One is, years ago, the police department would come to your house and do a security audit. Very simple things you could do. We had them, we did them, done. Is there such a thing for climate, for global warming in your home, where someone comes and does an audit? And then the second question is there a breakdown, and maybe this is you, I don't know, is there a breakdown, not just, in terms of those six Montgomery, 6 Maryland, 6 by age? Because young people are saying, this is the crisis, forget doing any work on anything else. And older people, I think, are still working on the stuff we've worked on all our lives.
First question to Mike.
Yeah, energy audits, you can just Google home energy audits.
there's some information on the
PEPCO
front
does 'em.
side of
Well,
your
can you trust
handout here about signing up for an energy audit.
I mean, can you trust PEPCO to do this?
Yeah, I think you can. I mean, PEPCO, we have a law in our state called the Empower Maryland Law that mandates that we use 2% less electricity every year. It's a great law. We had to fight really hard to get it passed. It's on the books. We're in the top 5 states for energy efficiency. And that means that PEPCO and BG&E every year have to show gains. They have to actually sell less electricity. And the only way they do that is by helping consumers like you, by doing home energy audits. They want you to get more efficient. So yes, but they're not the only ones. There are also private companies that will give you audits.
So to answer the other question, yes. Historically, no. No difference between grandparents' generation, parents' generation, and young adult generation. In the past 5 years, that's all begun to change. You can see it, obviously, in the news. Greta Thunberg has been like amazing influence on young people everywhere. But the really important part of that is it's not just young Democrats, it's young Republicans too. So young Republicans are finally waking up to this issue, and they're going to drag their parents and their grandparents along with them. And Republican electeds know this, and they know, especially those who are in districts where they need to earn some independent votes to keep their house, to keep their office. They realize, okay, I can't take the idiot positions I've been taking on this issue in the past, because now my young voters will not come back to me.
Thank you. My question is to Joyce. I'm awfully glad there are teachers like you, because, as has been said, the young people are going to live with this longer than all the rest of us. But I'm wondering how you modulate your presentations to keep from increasing the teen suicide level.
No, that is a serious issue. I mean, I've been teaching since, I don't know, the early 90s, and the anxiety level of my high school students is off the charts. It's scary to me. Hope. Endless amounts of hope and great things. Like, for instance, actually the projection for 2019 emissions. Last year, 2018, Europe reduced their emissions. This year, Europe reduced again, and the projection is the U.S. We might have reduced our emissions, actually, because we've shifted so much to natural gas. So, I mean, we haven't reduced 8% like we need to, but hope, just constant, endless good news. Find something good news awesome to tell them, because they have to hear it.
And truth be told, she only gave the first half of her usual talk. The second half dealt with solutions. So we went from gloom to hope.
Right, but it's fine to hear about solutions, but then you hear about Trump saying that windmills cause cancer. The total effect on you.
Do you want to answer that as well?
Our beloved former EPA administrator, Jeannie McCarthy, loves to say, no one follows a mope. And she, she put her in front of any room and everybody will walk out of there so activated, so energized, because she really believes that we still have agency. We can still amass power and we can still turn this thing around. The reality is the reality, and the news from the climate scientists is going to continue to get worse for as long as every one of us in this room is alive. That includes the folks over here. But we can continue to get more powerful in terms of using our agency and turning this thing around, and we have to be relentlessly positive.
Over here.
Yes, thank you everyone for your presentations. Maybe Mike, this is for you or anyone else wants to answer it, because you did address reducing meat consumption. I think, there's still like a disconnect between deforestation and cattle grazing and factory farms and methane and its whole relation to factory farming, to climate change, as there's always been a disconnect with environmental groups and factory farming. It seems like if we're talking about eat less meat, what does that mean? We need a reduction in emissions, 8%, 10%, 15%. We need a serious reduction in factory farm products. We know the effects of factory farming in Maryland and the Eastern Shore, with the Chesapeake Bay. But when you have billions and billions and billions of animals going through a factory farm system every year, you have to start somewhere, and it's an individual.
The solution there is to get rid of Trump, have a Democrat appoint an EPA administrator who will pass regulations that control.
Well, diet is such a huge part of this problem. If you were to look at the graphs, like methane emissions leaked from fracking, it's about on a bar graph like this. Methane emissions from livestock agriculture worldwide, it's like many greater times larger. I don't know that, first of all, giving up meat, if I made a list of the 20 hardest things I've done in my life, like quit smoking, learn a foreign language in the Peace Corps, bury loved ones, just make a list of the 20 hardest things you've done in your life. For me, giving up meat's not even on that list. It's so easy. But the reality is, it's really hard to change people's views of diet. The number one way we're going to get people to eat lower on the food chain is to put a price on carbon, because meat is carbon intensive. It is so carbon intensive. So we'll have hamburgers for special occasions. You get $20 a hamburger, and then most days you'll have an Impossible Burger for $7. But we have to have a pricing system that reflects the carbon intensity of meat consumption, in my view.
Can I just add to that really quickly? So there's fascinating research on consumer activism. That the thing corporations fear more than losing your patronage is when you become angry enough about their practices that you speak about it publicly. They'd much rather you just be a dissatisfied customer who slinks away in the night quietly than you remain and start get that soapbox out and start screaming.
Well, there's so much disinformation now with the dairy industry because everyone's going towards plant-based milk, and that's just a huge surge. Dairy is just going under, and then there's a documentary called Game Changers, which doesn't even address really climate change or animal issues, and that is really energized people because it's a total health issue to go plant-based.
Yes?
Yep. I was wondering if it's on your radar that the wireless companies want to put 5,000 cell towers in Montgomery County. And the problem with that is not only that we would have these ginormous, ugly things in our front yards, but they are a huge energy hog. And I could send you some information on that.
Please do.
Because
5,000?
5,000. Every 5 to
5G.
11 houses. And they're 18 inches wide and 30 feet tall.
Isn't Hans Ringer a sponsor of that?
Yes.
Yes, he's all excited about it.
One more over here, and then we'll take some over there.
He's very pro.
Yeah,
So-
for 5G.
Ed, I'm wondering
Okay.
if you have communication, boiled down some of the communications for people like us, for talking points, or if there's a way to access those so that we can talk about which companies we want to, that are doing wrong, and how to talk about those. Do you have stuff like that put together?
So I can tell you at person on the planet needs to know about climate change in 10 words. It's real, it's us, experts agree, it's bad, but there's hope. There are
And it's
things we
happening
can
now.
do.
Well, the last part, I mean, the,
Well, the hope we need, we need to know there's hope.
There is a link
Absolutely.
to the, at the top of your handout, there's a link to the GMU 4C program. And I mean, it tells about some of the information, and there's also a way to contact him if you want to get more information.
Although I spend most of my effort trying to activate professionals.
Professional people.
For example, TV weathercasters.
Right.
We now have 800 weathercasters
Oh,
in America
okay.
who we provide materials with to talk about, to help them, their viewers in their community
Some of the most
understand
trusted
it's
people on
real,
television.
it's us, the experts agree, and explain the ways in which it's bad for people in their community.
Can you repeat those 10 words again? It's real, it's bad.
Experts agree, there's hope. There are things we can do that will make a big difference.
Yes, I'm Herb Simmons, I'm a climate mobilization and a climate writer. And the prevailing model that basically all three of you correctly articulated is that things are really bad and emission reductions at emergency speed is the potential answer. And I think that's only a small but important part of the answer, and it doesn't give very much hope. You, Ed, I believe, said, probably misquoting you slightly, but you said something like, if we do it right, we can make it less worse. No, prevent the worst is what I hear people saying now rather than 10 or 20 years ago. There's a model that's out there with a group, started by a group I'm involved in called the Foundation for Climate Restoration. And what they're talking about and investigating and researching, and we kicked off at the United Nations with 10 countries in the fall, is basically that there are techniques where we can draw down as much of it as 1 trillion tons of CO2 potentially safely and get our temperatures back to 0 or 0.5. And so restoring a safe climate as opposed to making things less worse. And for a whole bunch of reasons, and this take a lot of time to discuss that, that's not how the climate community, the climate scientists have been focused. So I just want to put that out there, get your reaction to that.
I totally agree. In my outreach to a different group of professionals, health professionals, my people, I say there's 3 things that we, the global community, has to accomplish as soon as possible. We have to complete the transition, the inevitable transition to a clean energy economy. It is inevitable, but as Bill McKibben says, we got to pick up the pace. We need to draw down. Joyce says that we were at 420, give or take, parts per million of CO2. We got to get it back down to its historical level of 280.
Yes.
The faster we can do that, the better off we will all be. As we accelerate the clean energy economy revolution, and as we dramatically accelerate the drawdown capabilities, we create communities where people are healthier than they've ever been, where people are more prosperous than they've ever been, where people are more secure than they've ever been. So I completely agree with what you said. But then the third thing I say we have to do is every community on the planet has to increase its resilience to climate impacts, because again, those are going to be growing for a while, and they can really be incredibly devastating.
Plant 1 million trees a year in Maryland every year for the next 10 years.
Regenerative
That's going to be in our Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act reform.
How do we keep cutting them down?
How do we what?
Keep going, cutting them down.
Yeah, well, another
Yeah,
issue.
keep the highway builders from cutting them down. In the back, yeah.
Yes, how could you act big and tough if you're from a non-democratic country? For example, Gulf countries produce a lot of carbon dioxide, but it's almost impossible for people to go outside, for example, and rally for global warming or something like that.
No, I totally understand the point you're making. I actually don't have a good answer, but I need a good answer really soon, because I'm taking a sabbatical next year, and I'm going to be going to key countries around the world and asking health professionals to work with me and start acting tough about making sure that the Paris Climate Agreement is the most important public health pact human civilization has ever had, and we're failing miserably at it. So I want my health and medical colleagues around the world to start linking arms and acting tough, and I can't do that until I have an answer to your question. So thank you for asking
We
a
need
great question.
maybe 2 more questions. Diana, you had your
I
hand up
just
forever.
wanted to emphasize the importance of our voices in all of this, and that, you know, I sort of hear over and over again, you know, like some piece of legislation, you know, that a legislator said, I've gotten a lot of calls on this, and then you learn that they got 5 calls on it, which was a lot of calls.
Right.
And so it's like, it's so easy,
Yeah.
really, it's so easy to have, it takes 30 seconds to have an impact.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you do happen to sign up for CCAN's alert list, we will give you so many opportunities to do that at the county level, at the national level, and in Annapolis. And I did want to sneak in one last plug. Hope has come up multiple times. Do we have hope? Greta Thunberg, my favorite quote from her, and you can find it online, where she says, stop looking for hope. Stop looking for hope. Start looking for action. When you take action, you're flooded with hope. When you see more action, you feel more hope. The more action we have, the more hopeful we will be, and that leads to more action still. And so I just want to plant that in your mind. Action is the antidote. And if you're interested in really creative action, 2 weeks from today, the 15th annual CCAN Polar Bear Plunge at National Harbor. It is a peak life experience. I have the flyers right here. Listen, come, even if you don't get donations, come enjoy the party. If you do consider going in, you don't have to go all the way in. Some people go up to their hips, some people a little bit more, some people just underneath. But it's really, really fun. And I really ask you, consider joining us. There's information here. It's 2 weeks from today. You'll have a great time. National Harbor.
Warmer than it used to be.
Yeah.
Final question, and then we have, I know Fran needs to make an announcement, and we have a couple of closing announcements as well. So last question.
You mentioned the idea of climate silence. And we were talking about things that individuals can do, and doing things around your house is helpful and makes you feel good, but it may not. But can you speak to is your sphere of influence underestimated and underutilized by most people? Is that in conjunction with what you're saying, climate science? Is that a big thing that we're really not doing?
Yes, most of us, we've done a lot of research answering that exact question, and it is yes. Most Americans are concerned about climate change, yet they perceive themselves to be in the minority. They choose not to talk about climate change because they're worried about getting in a fight with dismissive Dan or alarmed Ed. Frankly, I'm just as alarming to them as my brother Dan. And most Americans are concerned, but they don't really want to get into it. They don't want to talk about it because they fear getting into it with one of us who has what they consider to be an extreme point of view. In reality, once we all start talking about it, then we will all realize almost all of us are similarly concerned, and then we'll get down to the real business of engaging with our electeds and telling them, well, look, party's over. We need you to do the right thing, and we need it now.
Thank you very much.
I just want to invite all of you to consider coming to the WDC's February 5th luncheon. We will have Greg Miller, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning Washington Post reporter and a national security correspondent, and he will be talking, and you can raise your climate questions in this forum. He'll be talking about the Trump impeachment in the age of post-truth. The location is to be determined, but if you check our website, you will find it.
On the top of your handout,
thank you.
It has a listing of the WDC website.
Okay, and we have vegetarian options at all of our events. We're trying our best, Nancy. Give us ideas.
I hope by next year there won't be meat options. I hope by next year it will simply be
One more announcement, which is tomorrow from 2 to 4 at Temple Shalom. The climate mobilization is strategizing for its 2020 goals and mission to make sure that we support the right legislation, that we push our county council If you're interested in participating, please join us from 2 to 4 tomorrow at Temple Shalom. See me afterwards.
And one last request from everybody, we need to stack up all the chairs against the walls. So as you get up, we're not pushing you out of the way, but you can stack the chairs against the walls.